Tell me, are our brains shrinking?
Yes, oh, very much so. Ha! It's pretty tragic. Well, what makes the brain so different from everything else is that it's made of fat, whereas the body's made of protein. And all the recommendations that you've got from governments are to do with protein and body growth. And it's manifestly clear that average height has been increasing and increasing. That unless we pay attention to the brain-specific nutrients, we will become a race of morons.
This is one of the topics, omega-3s in particular, I've become a little bit obsessed with.
On primates in which we deprived them of omega-3 fatty acids, a very serious self-harm, and we had to stop the experiment.
Our brain doesn't perform the same. And should pregnant women really be restricting the amount of seafood that they're eating?
Why should they restrict the amount?
Many times they're told that because of mercury levels. Do you think policy has caught up today?
No. The policy's got nowhere near. It hasn't even started. The cost of brain disorders is greater than heart disease and cancer combined.
Wow. What are the mechanisms? What is DHA doing in the brain? Well, welcome to Shortbread. We're going to talk to a legend, Dr. Michael Crawford. We're going to talk about DHA, why it's important for our brain, how we know what we need to do to preserve our intelligence, our mental health. So now, tell me, Dr. Michael Crawford, are our brains shrinking?
Yes, oh, very much so. I mean, um, it's pretty tragic, but we predicted this in 1972 when we first discovered that docosahexaenoic acid was important for the brain and its evolution. It was known that docosahexaenoic acid was present in the brain, but what we discovered was that if you looked at the brains of 32 different mammalian species, they all had exactly the same high amount of docosahexaenoic acid. Regardless of size of the brain, the size of the brain varied, but the proportion of DHA did not vary. So
And
that
what does
told
that
us
tell you? Yeah.
there was something pretty important. And we did a study on primates in which we deprived them of omega-3 fatty acids, and they went, quite frankly, they indulged in very serious self-harm
Mm.
and behavioral disorders, and their hair fell out and all sorts of things happened. So we were advised to put the omega-3 back in the diet of the animals, which we did, and hair grew back, and they were all very happy and lovely and everything like that. And then we withdrew DHA, the omega-3 again, and then they went bananas. A very serious self-harm was they indulged in, and we had to stop the experiment. So that was the first evidence, clear evidence of the importance of omega-3 fatty acids in terms of behavior, of brain behavioral stories. And the point about it was that, of course, it wasn't the omega-3 fatty acids that were important, it was DHA, because there's really no other omega-3 fatty acids in the brain to speak of. So it really was a clear demonstration of the importance of DHA to
Oh,
brain behavior.
okay. Two quick questions. In that experiment, did you change anything else in the monkey's routine or diet? And then also, have you ever seen this evidence kind of replicated in humans?
Well, there is a, um, ah, I mean, there's a whole story about it. We've not been involved in it, but there's a lot of people who have been publishing on DHA and human behavior, and there's learning and cognitive development and so on. So, I mean, since the 1970s, the evidence has just multiplied again and again and again, and so there was a meeting with the World Health Organization and Food and Agricultural Organization in 2008, and the data was published in 2010. And what they said was that the evidence of the importance of DHA for the brain was at the highest level of confidence.
Wow.
So there you have it. And you can't get better than that because, I mean, getting evidence, it really is the level of confidence that matters. So too, and there they said it in black and white that the level that the evidence that DHA was important, DHA specifically was important for the brain, was at the highest level of confidence.
Right. And so are you thinking that's we see your book's written about shrinking brains. So we have
Yeah,
IQs that are on the decline. We have mental health that is on the
yeah,
decline.
yeah, yeah,
Do you
yeah.
see DHEA or DHA deficiency as one of the main levers or drivers of that?
Well, we think so. I mean, go back to 1972, if I may, on the
Yeah.
5th of November, 1972. Graham Rose reviewed a book that my wife and I wrote at the time, which was called What We Eat Today. And in this book, we said that, the evidence that these essential fatty acids are of fundamental significance to the brain is such. Oh, this is already in 1972. We weren't the only people. There was Dean Anderson working on vision and other people working on the brain as well. The evidence is such that we really have to consider um, their significance in terms of food policy. Otherwise, the brain is going to disintegrate. Not, we didn't quite use those words, but that was effectively what we said. And Graham Rose, in his review of the book in the Sunday Times, said that unless we pay attention to the brain-specific nutrients of for the brain, we will become a race of morons. Now, the exact quote is, "We will become a race of morons." That's what he said. That's what he wrote.
Wow.
So the evidence and the statement was totally clear. 1972, and nobody paid a blind bit of attention to it.
Wow.
And do you want to hear more about that?
I absolutely do. And I want to hear more about that. And I want to hear about what you think. Do you think policy has caught up today?
No, 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 no. Policy's going nowhere near. It hasn't even started.
I
Uh,
know 50 over
this
how
is the problem. This is the problem. In 2005, there was a European audit of health costs. Everyone was surprised that brain disorders, disorders of the brain, came top of the list at 386 billion euros.
wow.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And brain disorders was top. Where people said, "Yeah, boo, it's just clever, clever psychiatrists have coming up with new diagnostics and things like that." So the European Union did the numbers again in 2010, and it was 789 billion,
Wow.
up from 386.
Almost.
780 billion. And
Wow.
brain disorders top of the list. So, but in between those two times, I mean, I obviously knew what was going on with the Europeans because we're always in contact with our European colleagues and people who are working on the same topic as well. There's many of them. So Paul Nicholson, ran a charity for uh, helping people in poverty, and who was a wonderful reverend man. And he said he and I discussed this, and he said, "Well, we've got to get something done about it." And we went to see Alf Morris, or Lord Morris at the time, of course, in the House of Lords. And Morris was very much concerned with disabled people, and that's why and Nicholson happened to know him, so that was quite good. We explained to him what was going on in Europe, that brain disorders had come top of the list, and by George, somebody should be doing something about it because we already identified in 72, for heaven's sakes, that if you don't do something, if you don't target brain nutrition, then you're going to be in trouble. So he then got asked a question in the House of Lords, and Lord Warner from the Department of Health responded to him, and he said, "I'm sorry, we don't know the cost of mental ill health in the UK, but we do know the cost of drugs in the hospitals for mental ill health." And he says,
Mm.
"Wow, it's been going up and up and up and up and up."
Wow.
So give the department credit. They then did the numbers. And Joe Nurse, Dr. Joe Nurse, who was head of the mental health division of the Department of Health, reported the numbers. It was 77 billion for brain disorders, for mental ill health in the UK, and that was top of the list. And
Wow.
she said when she presented the data, the cost of brain disorders is greater than heart disease and cancer combined.
Wow.
Now, this is 2007. So, uh, and as I mentioned, the European Union redid the numbers in 2010. The UK also did the numbers in 2010, and it was up from 77 billion to 103 billion.
Oh
The
my,
World
so
Trust then did the numbers in 2013, and it was 113 billion. And
wow.
all of them, of course, have brain disorders in the top. Now, you would have thought, I mean, what makes us different from other animals? What makes us different from a chimpanzee, a gorilla, or a patas monkey? What makes us different? Our hands? No, they have hands. They have hands. Our feet? No, they've got feet. They've got two legs and two arms and two hands, left and a right. What makes us different? The brain.
Yeah. Tell us about
It's
that.
the
Yeah. So,
brain that makes us different.
yeah, and I want to go into that, but first tell me, because I'm going to hear your story and how you got into this research, but what is in the way of the policy?
Oh, sorry, I missed that. There was a noise outside.
No
The
problem.
motorbike.
I'm going to go into your story after this quick question. I want to know, what do you think is deterring policy from catching up to this important science? Like why is no one listening or caring or acting?
I wish I knew.
Yeah.
It's either plain stupidity
Yeah.
or there's some kind of deliberate dark
Hmm.
policy involved with ignoring it.
Yeah.
It may have, to challenge it requires a complete reversal of a lot of the food systems that we have today. And it's quite possible that there is a dark,
Yeah. Force at play
dark,
somehow. Dark
uh,
intentions.
dark
And
working.
yeah, and one of my favorite books I've read recently is The Queen of Fats. And you were featured prominently in that. You were mentioned many times. And it was about how ultra processed foods have to take out the omega-3s because they're so vulnerable. And so because such a large proportion of our calories come from ultra processed foods today, we are very
Yeah.
deficient. We are not, the majority of our calories are not including these incredibly important brain fats. So take us there, Dr. Crawford. How did you get into this research and tell us about the brain? What makes the brain so different, like you were going to get into before?
Well, what makes the brain so different from everything else is that it's made of fat, whereas the body's made of protein. And all the recommendations that you've got from government are to do with protein and body growth. And it's manifestly clear that average height has been increasing and increasing.
Hmm.
And this is seriously worrying because you see, the brain is in contact with every square millimeter of your surface.
Mm.
So the bigger you are, the bigger the surface area that the brain has to cover, so that it knows where the big toe is or where your hand is or whatever. And so if you look at the animal kingdom, and this is stuff we published back in the 1970s, and it's in our books, in both books, all books that we've written. Um, if you look at the comparative evidence, if you look at the animals that grow very fast, But start with the little animals, like a squirrel. A squirrel has quite a high proportion of brain in relation to its body size.
Hmm.
About 2.5% of a squirrel's body weight is devoted to its brain.
Hmm.
And the point about this is that the land-based animals are capable of making DHA for the brain from the parent of the essential fatty acids called alpha-linolenic acid. And that occurs in green foods. And some beans, not many beans, but some beans contain flax seeds, of course. So, but the point is, and this was all shown in the 1960s and 70s by Brenner and a whole lot of other people at that time, that the velocity of conversion from the parent acid to the long chain, highly unsaturated, 18 carbons with 3 double bonds to 22 carbons with 6 double bonds. The conversion process is slow.
Mm.
Now, the absorption of amino acids is very complete. The absorption of meat or anything like that, or protein foods, gets rapidly converted into its individual amino acids, which are absorbed and used for protein synthesis in the body. But this is a totally different story with the lipids. You have to build up from these parents, and you have to get from an 18 carbon with 3 double bonds to a 18 carbon with 4 double bonds, a 20 carbon with 4 double bonds, a 22 carbon with 5 double bonds, a 22 carbon with 5 double bonds, and then eventually a 22 carbon with 6 double bonds. And in fact, it's worse than that. But so what is happening is that as animals grew bigger, their ability to make DHA shrank
Mm.
because the velocity of cell growth outstripped the velocity of synthesis of DHA.
Mm.
So that it was a simple equation. The protein could go in straight.
Yeah.
Lipids you had to build up from this parent thing, and it takes time.
Yeah. And
So if you grow fast, you outstrip the rate velocity. And we've showed this. You can study these animals and you find that they get stuck at the 22 carbon with 5 double bonds, not making it to the 22 carbon with 6 double bonds.
so that's
And you
EPA instead of DHA, right? So we're stuck at the EPA version or something.
not EPA, the Cheney long product of EPA, which is a 22 carbon with 5 double bonds, which is the immediate precursor. Well, it's not quite the immediate precursor because actually there's quite a complicated business converting the 22.5 to DHA. But the 22.5 um, accumulates in these animals because they don't have time to get to 22.6 before they have to seal the making of a cell.
Mm.
And so as the velocity of body growth increases, the ability to make DHA diminishes.
Mm.
And so you have the squirrel with a brain size in relation to body of about 2.5%. And then you get up into the big animals like a rhinoceros, who are about 0.1%.
Mm. Point
So
one.
brain velocity, brain size in relation to the body just simply collapses as body size increases, without exception.
And where are humans in that?
And we're humans, and we're now indulging in increase in body size
Mm.
and reduction in brain size.
Ooh.
It's a very elementary equation. And it's made worse by the fact that we are no longer eating the main sources of DHA and its associated trace elements, which is sufficient seafood. Because again, there's another very elementary story here.
Yeah.
And the elementary story that everybody knows, but they probably don't think about. And the elementary story is this, that the brain evolved in the sea
I love this story.
500 million years ago.
Tell us the story.
Small number of electrically active cells became more and more complex, growing bigger and bigger organ, more and more complex, serving more and more things and being able to do more things over a 500 million year stretch, fed only by marine food. There
Hmm.
was nothing else.
Hmm. And how do we know that?
And so it's elementary that the marine food web provides it also provides copper, manganese, zinc, selenium, and iodine, all of which are important. These trace elements are important in a kind of very interesting way because each trace element is the active component of antioxidant enzyme systems,
Hmm.
and they're all distributed in different parts of the cell. Some in the membrane, some in the mitochondria, some in the cytosol. Different enzymes, different trace elements. So these are almost as important as DHA itself. And as you probably know, the iodine deficiency is prevalent amongst present population. There's supposed to be something like 4 or 5 billion people at risk to iodine deficiency, and they're all living inland. We did a study in Indonesia, well, in the 1990s for the government and WHO, and the first thing that appeared was that 60% of the school children in Indonesia had palpable goiter because of iodine deficiency. 60%.
Wow.
But they were all inland. There was none in the fishing villages.
Wow. Isn't
None
that
in the
fascinating?
fishing villages. So what I recommended to the government, and it was supported by Darwin Karyadi, who was from the Ministry of the Health at the time, was that really what you've got to do is to start growing kelp, because
Hmm.
kelp is rich in iodine and these other trace elements. And some kelps contain DHA as well. And you can use kelp dried, and because part of the problem was that the inland people couldn't have fish because they didn't have refrigeration. There's a hot, humid, and transporting fish from the coastline into the center of the land was tricky.
Yeah.
They didn't have preservation at that time. So they've been growing kelp, and now the kelp producers are making more money than the inland farmers.
Isn't that amazing?
And they're sorting the iodine deficiency.
Yeah. And that's what I'm thinking.
So
I'm so,
it's not just DHA, but it is this 500 billion year period of evolution that has produced this phenomenal organ that we have. And you can ask yourself, 50,000 years ago, the mammals evolved. There was this big boundaries when the dinosaurs collapsed and all that kind of stuff. And you had these flowering plants and a much nicer sort of environment, but much softer. And the mammals evolved. And people forget about this, but a lot of the mammals said, hey, this land-based stuff's not really all that great, and went into the sea. And
mm,
we now have dolphins, seals, otters, and all sorts of animals in using the marine environment, mammals, with large brain capacities. The
yes.
dolphin, for example, has um, a brain size of about 1.7 kilograms.
What
And
percentage of their body weight is that?
what's that?
What percentage of their body weight is that?
Well, it's about 1%.
1%.
About 1%. We're at about 1.8% at the moment,
Oh, okay.
and we're shrinking.
Yeah. How
The
quickly is that shrinking?
figure.
Yeah.
During human evolution, um, there's only one way that we could have achieved this large brain that we have, was to be able to have access to the marine food web
Mm.
and the freshwater food web as well. And it was quite clear that the Cro-Magnon reached uh, Mrs. Ples. Mrs. Ples, I love Mrs. Ples. She lived 2 million years ago, and
Mm.
she had a brain size of about 450 cc's.
Mm.
And I've got a skull somewhere. I should have brought it here. Um, anyway, Mrs. Ples was about 2 million years ago. And then you've got increase in brain capacity, and you come to the people who lived in Herto about 160,000 years ago, or about 200,000 years ago. And they had a brain capacity. These quite almost complete skulls had been found in Herto. They were living beside the sea at the time. Um, they had a brain capacity of about 1,450 cc's.
Wow.
And Cro-Magnon, they're between 28,000 and 32,000 years ago. Um, People have reported brain capacities of about 1,500 to 1,700, a peak of 1,700, about the same size as a dolphin.
Wow.
Um, that was 28,000 to 32,000 years ago. When I was first interested in the brain in the 1970s, um, the average brain capacity was 1,450, about the same as Herto. So it had shrunk a bit by then.
Hmm.
But the average brain capacity today is 1,336, down from a peak of 1,700.
Wow.
And mental health is going through the roof. Um,
Yeah, have they ever looked at individual cases of, mental health and the size of the brain, like to see if there's a correlation or just we're just looking at wide population based?
well, it's not only the size of the brain, but I think it's deeper rooted than that.
Mm.
And the recent Scottish report um, on the health of children
Mm.
really talks very alarmingly about the escalation of autism in children and
Mm.
the escalation of children with special needs. It's just a curve like that, just going straight up.
Hmm.
And it is deeply worrying. And nobody, despite all the evidence and despite all those audits of health between 2005 and 2013, nobody's paying any attention to it. And it is it's a far greater threat than climate change. It's a far greater threat because if you lose the brain, you lose Homo sapiens. It's reverse evolution. And the decline in IQ would, if it continues, would mean that people in by 2060 or thereabouts, uh, they would be in the range of IQs of about between 80 and 90, which is the range of pretty severe uh, subnormality.
Oh, yeah. That's a very scary thought. Our intellectual capital, our children, these are the people who can solve the problems, the other
It's,
problems that
it's,
we have.
it's our children that their children, the children of our children that's at stake in this, and nobody's paying a blind bit of attention to it.
I know, and that's why this is one of the topics, omega-3s in particular, I've become a little bit obsessed with. And I
Yeah.
have done a lot of reading and I've actually done a lot of self-experimentation. So I'm someone who's prone to mental health issues. I have a bipolar aunt, and I've noticed when I eat seafood, herring, specifically herring, mackerel, salmon, sardines, roe
Yeah.
on a regular basis, I feel different. I feel calmer. I feel more focused. I feel happier. It's really, really a profound change for me. So can you tell us, we have a bit of a nerdy audience. What are the mechanisms? What is DHA doing in the brain? And
What
kind
does it do in the brain?
of what
Oh,
does it do? What is it helping us to do?
well, we think it's a quantum mechanical device.
Tell us what that
Uh,
means. Break that down for people who don't understand quantum mechanics.
well, it's a sort of wonderful new, or not all that new now, but it's a wonderful sort of um, process whereby electrons become waves and waves become clusters of information and things like this. And DHA is is very interesting because it has this six double bonds. Each double bond has a methyl group in between. Now, if you have double bonds without anything in between, electrons can flow all the way along the line because the electron clouds overlap in the double bond. Um, now, but with the methyl group in between, the electron clouds are separate. So
Mm.
the electrons are confined to their little wells and they sit there very happily. But, 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 if you have and the brain is full of this, if you have a positive and negative charge, and everything that happens in the brain is due to positive and negative charges. If you have a positive and negative charge you have across the cell membrane, then it's possible if it gets strong enough, such as in hyperpolarization, you can pull an electron out. And if you pull an electron out, you've now got a single bond and you've got a hole.
Mm.
Um, Nature doesn't like holes.
Mm.
And so what was likely to happen is that a neighboring electron, which has been buzzing about, and Richard Feynman says you've got to think about electrons, that they're really not confined to anything. They can be anywhere. And so an electron would find this hole. Ha ha! So I found a hole. Oh, I found a hole. Oh, how lovely. And but, if that electron has the same sort of spin and quantum numbers as the present, because you get electrons in pairs, and if it has the same identity as the electron that's in there, it'll get, oh, I'm not having you here, and it goes away again. But if it has the same identity as the electron that's been moved, it can pop into the hole.
Mm.
So now we have a very interesting thing, because if you have this electron um, movement, you can get a current to flow,
Mm.
because electron movement is the flow of current. And if you've got the reason you've got the hole is because you've got a positive and negative charge across the membrane. So a current will now flow across the membrane. Now, the trick is this, and nobody's thought about this, is that the current will only flow with electrons at identical quantum numbers, which means identical energy. And so you have here a mechanism for control of the absolutely critical importance of precision of the signal.
Mm.
To do what we do, to see what we see, to think what we think, what processes, you have to have precision.
Mm.
You can't have a blur out there.
Right.
You have to have precision to see, to read something. You need precision in all the signaling that the brain does. And so DHA can provide for precision of electron movement.
Mm,
And it's now understood, people are now talking about it because it's called electron tunneling. And
mm.
we published about this quite a few years ago. And we think that this is what DHA is doing in the brain, that it's actually providing a mechanism for electron tunneling, which is enabling the brain to send messages that are absolutely covered by total precision
And give
and
me
no messing about.
that makes a lot of sense. So learning like processing speed, continuity of thought. So if I'm getting you brain fog, visual blurry vision, like what would the symptoms be when we don't have enough DHA? What would our life look like? How would it be different?
Well, to start with, you would lose night vision.
Yeah.
So that's a very good thing. But that's the main thing that you would notice. But inadequate amounts of DHA result in loss of memory, loss of cognition, cognitive abilities, and things like that. All been demonstrated in experimental animals, of course.
Yeah.
But we presume that this is pretty well identical. Where we've got experiments that do go right back to the 1970s,
Mm,
showing the significance in vision. Gene Anderson, in particular, and Nicholas Bazan, way back then, were describing the importance of DHA in vision. And you've got the Retina Foundation in Dallas showing it in preterm infants and things like that, both with regard to vision and with regard to cognition. And the beauty about working with a preterm infant is that you're working with a newborn where the majority of the brain cells that divide during pregnancy haven't actually completed it. So working in the preterm was a very valuable tool to begin to get evidence
mm.
for the significance in the human, um, moving up from the evidence that was absolutely abundant in the animals. Hence, the evidence that docosahexaenoic acid is important in the brain is at the highest level of confidence.
I love that. And I just read a paper where they preterm in infants, it improved body weight and the length of the gestation, essentially. So if you
Yeah,
had enough DHA on board,
yeah,
the infants weighed more and they're were delivered later, which is generally
yeah.
considered a favorable response. So I want to get to how do we get enough DHA in a second. But first, you really piqued my interest because you were studying wild game, right? And how different the makeup of their fat was than maybe today, the animals that
Oh
we're
yeah,
consuming today.
I mean, we report, but we're working in East Africa. We reported a lot of the difference between wild game, which is what Homo sapiens would have eaten, and what we were eating today, which was a total corruption of, it was off what they called marbling as a beautiful thing for full of flavor. Honest to God. Marbling is just replacing. Well, what they do is they take the animals and put them in stalls and then stuff them full of high calorie foods and things like this and high protein, growth accelerators and blah, blah, blah. And of course, what happens is brain cells disappear and get replaced by fat. So you get this marbling, which they think is good. Um, but I mean, we when we were in East Africa, we ate a lot of wild meat, and I can tell you that the flavor of the wild meat is just unbelievable, and you don't need all this fat to taste it. So the food system has gone wrong. It's been sort of devoted to various reasons that had nothing to do with human nutrition. And it's it's interesting in a sort of sideline of that the 2012 Expo was in South Korea in Yoisu, and this is a port region in the south of Korea, the south of Korea. And the theme of Expo 2012 is life began in the oceans. We have to save the oceans to
Mm,
save ourselves.
mm,
And that I think is really the key to the thing. That today all our fishing villages have been more or less
mm,
destroyed with I'm not 100% sure for the reason of the decline in fisheries, but there's been no support for the fishing people. There's been no support for cleaning the rivers,
mm,
which used to be rich in fish. I remember my father used to catch fish from the River Armand, not very far from the bottom of our garden in Barnton, in Edinburgh. And then a paper mill came along and killed all the fish.
mm,
And this was the sort of thing that was going on. And Cramondin, the proprietor used to go down to the foreshore of the Firth of Forth and collect the seafood to have for supper in the evening. And he was the best seafood restaurant in Edinburgh. My
mm.
father always had an excuse for celebrating to go to Crownton to have supper there. And we very often on a Saturday would have supper at Crownton. So when I came back from Africa, I was sort of grown up. This was in 1965. I went up to Edinburgh with my wife and two children, and said to my brother and my mother, who was still alive, let's go on a trip down trip down memory lane to Cramond Inn.
Mm,
And so it was a beautiful July evening. We drove down to Cramond Inn and parked the car behind the inn and walked down to the uh, foreshore to have a look at this beautiful bridge, you know, the big iron bridge that spans the Firth of Forth, and take a picture of it. And as we approached the shore, which was only a few steps from the inn, there was a brand new Department of Environment notice saying, warning, mussels unfit for human consumption.
mm.
And the
Sad.
proprietor no longer had fresh seafood.
Mm,
And that was in my lifetime, the Firth of Forth has been destroyed. And
wow.
that's been going on all around the coastline with the destruction of fishing villages and the destruction of a way of life, with islands being depopulated. But it's possible to reverse that. It's possible to start cleaning up the seabed, cleaning up the rivers, and the Japanese are doing this. The
Tell us about
Chinese
what they're
are doing
doing.
it.
How are they doing it? What is the process and the system looking like?
There are two islands of Okayama in Japan. And what they did was to more or less fence off these two islands. Not literally, but they put a ban on anybody going anywhere near the water between the two islands. And what they then did was to clean up the seabed, which had been destroyed by trawlers and things like that, and plant Zarina frustora, the marine grasses.
Mm,
So they planted grasses for the vegetarian fish. In the same way, so they had green pastures in the sea, the same way that we have pastures for sheep and cows and things like that. Elementary, it was just completely elementary. And
mm,
then they planted marine um, artificial reefs, which were really big concrete blocks. And but they did research on this, and they found that, for example, I can't remember which species it was, but one of the species liked to burrow into holes and things like that and spend its time in holes. So they planted reefs full of holes where it was doing all
mm.
its breeding and things like this. So it was all very like ecological. And they weren't actually inputting anything. They were just allowing nature, having cleaned the thing up, allowing nature to do the job.
I love it.
And they've in a matter of a few years after they had completed the exercise, they tripled the productivity of the seafood and fish. And of course, they grew oysters and things like that as well as, and you can have crabs and lobster farms and all this kind of thing. Um, we could get back to that kind of thing by just doing quite simply what the Japanese have been doing.
I love that. It's like regenerative
We've got a
farming of the
wonderful
sea.
coastline. Think
Yeah.
about our coastline. There's
Yeah.
a huge coastline. And we've got hundreds of islands, many of them unpopulated. They could all become marine farms
Mm. I love the
and
idea.
still have aquaculture. And the aquaculture boys now are having a problem because they're having not getting enough offal from the wild caught fish. And so they're using vegetable oils from the land and all sorts of protein from the land as well. Chicken feathers or that kind of stuff. But you, if you were to do what I've just suggested, you would then have a harvest with a lot of offal that would be used for the aquaculture
Hmm. Right.
or the
So you
stock
think,
and get back to proper feeding of the salmon in cages and things like that. But the restoration of the lakes and rivers and things like that is key importance.
it's
And
imperative.
you develop a new economy. It could be an new industrial revolution.
Mm. I love that idea. So it's regenerative ranching, like I'm a proponent of for the sea. I think
Sure.
this is so incredibly important, like you're stating, like our brain doesn't perform the same when we don't have these minerals like iodine and DHA. So let's talk about that. What are you doing? You study DHA. What are the things you're eating? What should people be eating? And should pregnant women really be kind of restricting the amount of seafood that they're eating, in your opinion?
Why should they restrict the amount?
Many times they're told that because of mercury levels. Yeah.
Honest to God, there's a load of rubbish there.
Yeah.
Um, and we've been writing about this, and Philip Spiller, who was on the FDA and retired from the FDA, has got so upset about this stupidity. Um, I mean, when you stop and think about it, the Japanese ladies have been eating fish and seafood practically every meal almost.
Mhm.
Um, and they gave birth to the children that have grown up to have the best longevity, the least common cancers, and the least cardiovascular disease, and the least serious mental depression.
Mm.
So, where's the evidence?
Yeah.
It does not exist,
Mm.
simply doesn't exist. And but one of the reasons why it doesn't exist is very simple. There's a fellow called Nick Rawson in America who's been publishing about this. And the fact of the matter is that fish and seafood is rich in selenium, and selenium simply takes out the mercury.
Yeah.
And so the mercury doesn't have a chance to do any damage to the brain.
Mm.
The scare about mercury arose because I can't remember where it was. It was somewhere in the Middle East. There was crop failures and all sorts of things, some nasty things like that as they happen from time to time. And they flew um, seed out to these people, and the big skull and crossbones on the thing saying poison because the seed was coated with mercury to avoid um, fungal growth and things like this. And
Mm.
of course, people were hungry, so they ate it. And that this was a very high level of mercury and that they intake, and there was evidence of severe damage to the brain from that experience. But this was at a way, way, way above anything that you get from fish or seafood. And mercury occurs everywhere. It occurs in in milk. It occurs in all everything that happens. And there is more mercury in seafood than there is in land food, but at the same time, it's associated with large quantities of selenium, so the mercury can't do anything.
Yeah. And so they don't really have a lot of recommendations around DHA and EPA. How many milligrams per day do you think we should be aiming for? Or how many times should we be eating fish on a weekly basis to achieve what you believe is an optimal intake? Not like baseline, like, just preventing deficiency. What would we do to supercharge our brains and bring our IQs back up and feel good mentally and
Well, the
emotionally?
Japanese, of course, and a lot of the Chinese and everything around the coastline live on practically fish at every meal,
Yeah.
or seafood. Don't forget that things like crabs, periwinkles, and all that kind of stuff, and um, alive ho is the Molly Malone's barrow would make a good start. So I think everything that comes out of the sea is important. Mussels, for example, are quite cheap as a food. And in Belgium, it is very commonly to have a mole marinière. Kind of French do it as well. And oysters are expensive, of course, as are lobsters. Crabs not so expensive, but crabs are crab meat is wonderful. And then fish of all sorts, any sort, everything, every kind of fish um, uh, is perfect. So and I had to give a talk to Bangladesh television. It was way out in the East End, and um, they got a driver to take me back to NW1. And the driver asked me, well, what was I talking about on the thing, past conversation. So I told him I was talking about nutrition and the importance of nutrition in terms of health and brain health in particular. And I just commented, I said, but one of the things that's important to remember is that the brain evolved in the sea, as everybody really knows, and it evolved, it became more and more complex based on the marine food web. And so the marine food web is important for the brain. And he said, oh, yes, well, that's wonderful because we eat fish nearly every evening at home, he said. And he said, the wonderful thing about the marine food web is that you can have a different meal practically every night of the week, if not every night of the month.
Yeah.
This was from a taxi driver. So, I mean, there's your answer. But in practice, I think the evidence from the Artsback study is that um, you need at least 2 meals of fish and seafood during the week. And in the Artsback study was a study of 14,000 pregnancies in the Bristol region, Avon district in England. And they studied over 14,000 pregnancies, and they measured what happened during the pregnancy, et cetera, and gathered information on what the mother was eating, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they tried to get rid of one thing that stood out like a sore thumb was that the more they look at what the behavior of the children at 8 years of age from this uh, pregnancy study, the more they looked at the data, the more they found it was convincing
Mm.
that there was a direct line between the number of fish and seafood meals that the mother ate during the pregnancy and the mental health, behavior, cognitive scores of the children at 8 years of age.
Wow.
So the answer to your question is that you can eat as much as you want and can during the week, And the more you eat, the better your children were likely to be if you're pregnant. And that's the only answer I can give because this was a study of 14,000 pregnancies
I
in
love that.
England.
And how much are you eating on a daily basis? Because
Oh,
I'm
and by the
trying to,
way,
yeah, tell
and
us.
by the way, and by the way, Joe Hebron, who was an American and who was a captain in the National Institutes of Health, um, uh, and ran a laboratory at the National Institute of Health. He was the um, first author of this paper. He's a psychiatrist, and I know him very well indeed.
Mm,
And he's a wonderful man. And he wrote in this paper, he was the first author, that this idea of the FDA that mercury is you need to restrict fish and seafood consumption. He wrote in this paper, this recommendation, advisory, will do harm.
mm,
This is in the Lancet, 19, 2007, Lancet.
mm,
The advisory will do harm, and it is doing harm
mm,
because as a friend of mine told me only recently that a friend of hers had just given birth to a baby and said, "Oh, thank God, now I can eat fish again."
mm. Yep.
And you see what happened was, and this was American nutritionists and dietitians and people like that reported on this, that the women were saying, "Oh God, this mercury is toxic and it's in fish. I'm not going to eat any during the pregnancy."
Yeah.
And of
Scary.
course, if you looked at the scores of the children at 8 years of age from these 14,000 pregnancies, if you looked at the score of the cutoff point was 2 fish meals a week. Below that, the adverse outcome for the children in terms of behavior, cognition, etc., accelerated.
Mm. Wow, scary. And
So um, you want at least 2 meals, and the more you eat, the better.
I love that advice. Now, do you have time for two more questions?
Well, yeah, okay.
Okay, so I'm wondering if people don't have access to fish, if they're not going to eat fish, do you think there's an appropriate way to supplement with like a fish oil, or we do a fish roe, like we bring fish roe in? Is there anything you have to say about that? It's
So
hard.
people don't. I mean, that's crazy. People don't like steak. I mean, come on.
If somebody didn't
Therefore,
want fish.
if you were listening to Jesus of Nazareth, you'd have had a loaf and a fish to eat. Come on, this is ridiculous. But however, let's be practical. There are people who say they don't like fish,
Yeah.
and which I find bizarre. But it could well be because of the upbringing and so on and so forth. Um, when I first tasted beer, I thought, how on earth could anybody ever drink this rubbish? It's vile. And but peer pressure, and I love a pint of beer now.
Most people grow into that.
Yeah, well, anyway, so but I mean, in place of fish and seafood, one thing that you could eat are things like duck,
Okay.
goose,
Okay. And
pigeon.
grass-fed beef, right, has if you feed an animal
Grass-fed beef
correctly.
is,
Yeah.
yeah. The trouble with the grass-fed beef is that they do have this fattening afterwards, which is not so good, and there's a problem with that. Now, but you can get lean cuts, such as topside, for example, is pretty good. Um, but I mean, things like duck and goose and guinea
Okay.
fowl, because duck, goose, and guinea fowl, the meat contains significant amount of DHA because they're
Oh.
small animals, you see.
Hmm.
the small animals.
Okay. I love that tip. Okay, and then my last question is, I know you're probably aware of the omega-3 index and that people are now measuring the amount of omega-3s in their
Yeah,
red
yeah,
bloods.
yeah.
Do you think there's like some people believe above 8 is optimal? Is this anything that you think is meaningful or something we should be tracking?
Well, I mean, and I think if people do want to have some kind of assessment of
Yeah.
their health and their body, and the omega-3 index gives them an assessment of how much they have in stores, and and I think it's a good thing.
Mhm.
Um, but I don't think you need it, but because I think you all you need to do is to think about how much fish and seafood you eat. And if you eat less than two fish and seafood meals a week, you're in trouble,
Yeah. Okay.
quite frankly. And you need to eat more than that.
And do you eat it daily?
What's that?
Do you eat fish daily?
We have pretty well fish nearly every meal, evening meal.
Wow. Every evening meal. Okay.
But we have a meal, one meal off, perhaps.
Yeah. Fair. Okay, well, that's
But
amazing.
as the taxi driver from the Bangladesh meeting said, there's so much variety
Yeah.
um, in the fish and seafood world that we're very lucky. We've got a very good French um, shop very close to us here in Primrose Hill, and we get beautiful fresh fish, crabs,
Hmm.
squid, um, big funny things that look like tiny lobsters, all
Uh,
sorts of stuff, and expensive oysters, which we don't buy except on a very rare occasions.
mm,
But don't forget the oysters. If you go back, and we could aim for this, if we go back to the time of turn of the 1900s, the barman would go down to the Thames with a bucket in the morning and fill them with oysters and put the oysters on the bar free for people who came and bought
mm,
beer.
mm.
And the British Museum, the Museum of London, has we used to have, anyway, I've seen it, and many people have seen it, have a big notice saying, that was over a bar in the East End saying, oysters free with your beer.
I love it. I want to go there.
Um, we could get that back. I mean,
Hmm.
that's the whole point about it. It's reversible.
Yeah.
And the sooner we start doing it, the better.
Mm. I think it's such an important message. And like you said, there's so variety. Like even if you don't have a lot of time, like in the middle of the day, I have cans of mackerel and herring and
Yeah.
sardines and anchovies and salmon and tuna. And I just keep them all stocked in my pantry. And we have it for dinner tonight at sometimes too. But it's quick, it's easy. And it is something I try to do every single day now. A lot of because of your work. And so
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the beauty about it. You're quite right. I mean, to cook fish, um, it takes sort of 1 minute almost, 2 minutes, perhaps, on each side, and it's done.
right.
And it's so fast. And of course, some stuff you can eat raw. The Japanese eat lots of tuna raw. And we ourselves have from this wonderful shop buy sashimi tuna, and we'll have raw tuna once a week.
Love it.
Um, and it's lovely. It's beautiful raw tuna. And then if you have a sushi shop, you'll get raw salmon.
Hmm.
And if I'm lucky and I go near a sushi shop, I'll buy sushi for dinner.
Yes, and I love yellowtail. Yellowtail is one of my favorites. So
Um,
we try to
um,
do sushi once a week at our as a family too, and we do lobster and crab. Yeah, so and our son craves it. Like he asks for it. He wants to have salmon regularly. So yes, I think we need to bring this back. And Dr. Crawford, it's been such an honor and a pleasure. And I just want you to tell people what's next for you. Any last words of wisdom, and can they connect with you if they'd like to?
No. I was on a program with Rick Stein. He had an interview with me. And the interesting thing about this program was just before I came on, he was visiting a fishing village in the south of England. And he was talking to a man who ran a fishing boat. And it was only one of six fishing boats left,
Whoa.
one of six.
Mm,
And he was, and this was just typical of what's been going on in the United Kingdom. And no government has been paying any attention to this. It's about time they woke up.
mm,
And they really have, the government has to wake up to this because the mental ill health, decline in IQ and decline in intelligence, and the shrinking brain is going to bring about the end of Homo sapiens
mm.
in a matter of a few generations. It's the most serious issue.
Wow. I couldn't agree more. So, and it's something we can all do daily. It's something we can all change today and all work to change and all help people understand. So, thank you, Dr. Crawford. Can people reach out to you if they have questions?
Say again?
Can people reach out to you if you have questions? And are you still
Oh, yeah.
researching
I'm
or are you
happy
just
to answer any questions, but always happy to answer questions. Love talking about it. But I'd like to see something happen, though.
what do you
And
want to see?
perhaps people like you spreading the message will get things done.
Yeah. I certainly hope so. I want you to introduce me to every friend of yours doing this type of research, and
Right.
we'll keep putting more interviews out. And are you researching still? Like, what's next for you?
Yeah, yeah. I help with Professor Mark Johnson at Chelsea and Westminster Hospital and Dr. Eakin Wang, where we are investigating adverse pregnancy outcome and neurodevelopmental disorders.
Mm,
We've already got magnetic resonance imaging data showing that DHA supplement during pregnancy can enhance the development of certain regions of the brain before birth.
well,
And so the interesting thing about this was that the DHA supplement for this is all published and influence things like the corpus callosum and deep gray matter and so on, which
mm,
corpus callosum is connected with connectivity and could be related to autism if it's adversely affected.
wow.
And of course, uh, deep gray matter is very much concerned with cognition.
Mm.
So, but the interesting thing was that we only saw these effects in the boys. We didn't see it in the
Ooh.
girls. So it was the girls were responding to a different fatty acid. They were responding to arachidonic acid. And this
Oh.
is so we're now really investigating what does this all mean?
Mm. Well, I can't wait to find out. And I'm wondering at the other end of life, neurodegenerative conditions. Are you guys looking at that too? Or is
No, well,
anyone?
no. A student of mine did actually look at it in a very interesting way, but we're not in. That's wrong. We are interested in the end of life because I'm at the end of life. No, but our prime concern is getting things right at the start
Hmm.
because after that it's very difficult to put anything wrong with the brain right.
Hmm.
There's no catch up after birth.
Hmm.
Anything going wrong, any retardation during pregnancy and after birth, especially during the postnatal period, Anything going wrong during that period is it's lifelong. The effect is lifelong.
Mm. Well, Dr. Crawford, thank you for your work. This has been an incredible interview, and I just encourage everyone to support his mission. Eat
Well,
fish.
thank you, Autumn.
Yes. Feed your children fish, and hopefully we can do another one soon. So thank you so much for everything.
Well, thank you, Autumn, for this interview. I loved it, and much grease to your elbow.